Hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of The Struggle is Real 6.4 Powerstroke edition. So, oh my gosh, so this thing needs turbos, which are of course right there, and I'm going to do that. So there's a lot of things involved with being able to get to the turbos. I've been told, I have watched, I have read that it is far easier to get these turbos off if you pick the cab up a little bit, just so you can get to the pipes on the back side of the turbo and get them apart easier. Now you don't have to raise the cab up, but I'm going to, just because I'd rather take the extra time and make a little bit more room than I absolutely have to have than try and struggle with just being able to barely get in there and do stuff. I'm sick of that. So we're out here in the dirt. We're right next to a major road, and it's wheat harvest. So there's a lot of dust in the air. It's humid. There's no wind today, which I don't know whether to be grateful for or not. There's a little bit of a breeze, occasional gust, but it's not bad. So I have the cap off of the radiator, draining coolant right now. I'm not worried about getting dust in it, but this other stuff, as I get it apart, I'm just going to have to make sure to cover it real good, because, yeah, I'm about, I don't know, 80 yards from a major road, and everything out here is dirt. So all the people hauling grain to the elevator and stuff, they're just going by here at 60 miles an hour, and that's no joke. So to get the turbos off, like I said, you got to raise the cab up. But to raise the cab up, you don't have to take it off, you just got to raise it up. We only need about 4 to 6 inches, right? The video I watched on how to do this, I will link below. It's from Diesel Tech Ron. The old boy unfortunately passed away several years ago, but he did work on these, and he made a video about replacing turbos on this. So that's what I watched, and that's what I'm going off of to get most of this done. You get to watch, because he's a professional, or was a professional, but you get to watch professionals do this, right? I'm doing this so you can watch a hillbilly do it. And we're going to do this somewhat professionally. Now we have the turbos, and we have everything else that we need. So as long as I'm careful in getting stuff off, we should be good to go. So yeah, first thing, get the coolant drained. Where are we at on that? Oh, we're getting there. I'm going to drain quite a bit out, because you got to disconnect this hose, which I've done before. And you got to take the degas bottle out. You got to take the battery out, because the whole battery box and degas bottle is all one piece. That all has to come out. There's a hose buried down in there that is for this, and there's a hose here that's for this. There's supposed to be one here, but it's never been on there, so I don't really care about it. We have to take the fuel cooler off. This is a whole assembly. We get to take it off. We get to disconnect the back pressure sensor. We have to take the air cleaner off. We have to take the oil fill off. We need to disconnect the cab mounting bolts. There should be 6 of them, I believe. There's 2 in the front, 2 in the middle, and 2 in the back. Those aren't hard to get to. We just got to be careful not to spin the carriage nuts that are holding everything down. It's a bit of a Mickey Mouse system they've got in here. So all that has to come off. And we need to loosen... Well, we need to disconnect the shift cable, the parking brake cable. What else did he say we had to take off or loosen? Steering shaft, that has to be loosened. It's buried down in there. It's a whole bunch of stuff to take off. None of it's particularly hard to get to, except for the transmission shift cable. I think it's covered in dirt, but it should come off if I'm careful. And once all of that is off, then we can get in here. We can loosen the upper pipes that go to the back of the turbo. One of them is actually way back in there. You guys probably can't see it. Okay, that piece of pipe right there, that metal pipe, we got to take that off, which once the cab is up shouldn't be too bad. It disconnects down there and up here. Now the nice thing about this particular motor is that the EGR cooler is gone. It's been deleted, and it's been gone for a while. I don't know anybody in their right mind that would throw a fit about that thing being gone. I don't miss it, because that's just another thing to screw with and another thing to go wrong. But if it was in here, it would come up right here, and it would also run down along the side of the engine where the oil dipstick tube runs and the back pressure sensor, and nobody wants to screw with that stuff. So it's gone at least. I don't have to worry about it. But all this stuff needs to come off. Once the coolant finishes draining, the petcock for the coolant drain, I'll show that to you. It's right it's right there. That little white nut there, you loosen that and then it starts draining. It's a kind of a pain. I don't want to open it up too much because I don't want to lose the cap and just have it pour out too fast. I don't like to get my hands covered in antifreeze. And I believe that that's about everything that needs to come off of it. So we'll start by disconnecting this battery on the driver's side because I know for a fact that this box has to come out. Changing your, because this is the old style right here, these suck. This is what came out of the factory. If you ever have to replace them, I would advise going with these that have the stud on it, because then you can put these wing nuts on and that just makes it infinitely easier to do anything on these. And then just make sure you put the wing nut back on so you don't lose it. Not only does that save time and provide just as good a connection as anything else, it's also a little bit stronger, and you don't have to worry about taking these bolts loose all the time because that's what eats these damn clamps up. So you do want to keep that in mind. Now, well, we're still making power, so I guess that's good. I'm going to disconnect that, and then we'll go over to the other side and do it. I like to take the batteries out. Oh, there's the old wing nut. All right, mint. I thought I lost it, but I didn't. So now it's going to go in my pocket where I definitely won't forget it and leave it in the wash. I like to take the batteries out of here because then you don't run the risk of bumping these cables and running them into stuff. Now, in this case, I have to take the battery out because this whole assembly in here does need to be removed. But on the other side, I'm going to take it out as well. Even though that whole box and stuff doesn't have to come out, I'm going to take that battery out because, yeah, you just don't want to bump this stuff around and start arcing out on your cables. It's just not necessary. We're going to keep leaving the coolant drain open for now just to make sure everything's out of there that can be out. Okay, so all that's loose. We'll scoot that back, and we'll come in here and we'll go ahead and take this off as well. Okay, now that's out, and no, there are not any battery hold downs, and the reason there aren't battery hold downs is because they are a pain in the rear. And as often as we take the batteries out of this to work on it, you know, we got sick of taking them out. So that's out. So the next thing we'll do is take the air cleaner out. The air cleaner just pulls up. There's nothing fancy about it. You got to disconnect this one here. That's for your air filter reset. You got to disconnect this up here for your mass airflow sensor, I believe that is. Pull that tab and then push on that tab and it comes off. You need that out, and then you'll need a screwdriver to get this clamp, or you can use a socket. I think it's a 5/16. It is. It identifies as a 5/16. Once you get it pretty well loose, just loosen it up a little bit more. All right, so pop that boot off and then disconnect this other hose that's air intake, and it just comes out of the way. Disconnect that, set it aside, take your air cleaner, just pull up, comes right out. I mean, that was actually a little loose in there, but you guys get the idea. Stick a rag or something in there to keep the dirt out of that for now, because this oil fill and the rest of it, I mean, it will have to, all this will come out right here and here, and you remove all this as an assembly, but for right now, we're just going to leave it. This side battery box does not need to come out. It can stay. To get the coolant tank and this battery box out, there are 4 bolts that hold it in. There are 2 bolts that sit down in here, and there are 2 on the side that mount on the fender. They are 1/2 inch head or 13 mil, whichever you prefer. So get you a 1/2 inch or 13 socket and get them out. Now, if you've never taken them out before, they'll be a little bit stiff. So if there's a bunch of crud in here, my advice is to clean them up. You know, take an air compressor, blast everything out, get a lot of the dirt out of there, and then spray them down with the Huck and Pucky of your choice. WD-40, PB Blaster, Dollar General lubricating oil, whatever it is you prefer. And then get these on out of here. you get the battery box loose, you have to disconnect some hoses that are for cooling, and that's why we drain so much of the coolant out. I probably got about 3 gallons out of there, and that's going to make it a lot easier to get stuff out. And these are all the same size, so it doesn't matter if you put them back in order or not. So that's all loose in there. Okay, so the next thing you want to do, grab your channel locks. You want to take this hose off. Should just pop right off. Set that out of the way. That's just a drain hose. Let me make sure you guys can see. All right, you should be able to see everything there. This hose has to come off. There's a little clip in there you got to pull out. They're a pain in the ass to get back in. Don't lose them. That is what retains this upper radiator hose. You don't want to lose that. There's another hose buried back down in here that attaches to the bottom of this degas tank or cooling tank or whatever the hell you want to call it. You have to take that off too. Now that runs right over to what I believe is the water pump. I've never confirmed that, but I'm almost certain it leads over to the water pump. Now the best way to get access to all this stuff is to get these 2 lines over here that go to your fuel cooler, and you want to get all that out of the way. So, and you definitely don't want to get them mixed up. So let me make sure you can, yeah, it's these 2 lines right over here that you want to get. So you want to start by opening up your channel locks a bit so you can do it one-handed. Pop that clamp off, and then take the other clamp that goes on the actuator for the turbo. That's what runs the variable vanes inside that damn turbo. There. The fuel cooler is its own isolated system. This right up here, if you guys can see it, that right there is the that's the cap. This is a little reservoir right in here, and that's what you want to keep an eye on. Make sure your fuel stays cool. It takes separate coolant and everything. Last time I checked, it takes gold coolant. There's supposed to be like a little sight glass here that tells you if it's got stuff in it or not, but quite honestly, it sucks. It's a stupid ass system. So these lines have to stay like that, because then they're attached to steel, and then they run down and do all kinds of neat crap that you just don't want to screw with. So you got those out of the way. You know, pull them, get that cable out of the way, and pull them back like this. All right, so right down there is the hose that it connects to the degas bottle. It's one of them little stupid clips that you have to take out, and then it just comes off. Nothing to it. That's what you have to get off. It is a pain. You have to use a screwdriver. Getting it back on is even worse. There's a specific way you have to do it. It's a stupid system. I'm not gonna deny that. But now, if you're talented enough to get in here and not lose this, my hat is off to you. I'm probably gonna drop it. I most often do. Okay. Just got to get it popped out of its little shell down there. And there it goes. We'll find it later once we get this box out. So that hose should pop off just like that. There we go. There she is. Just like that. And now, oh, that's actually on there tighter than I thought it was. Okay. Then we do that. Tuck it out of the way somehow for right now. What a mess. All right, now that all that's out of the way, we go down in here. What's this hanging right here? Top of the steering box? That little tiny clip that holds that short hose to the degas bottle. Yeah, don't lose that stuff, because if you get, come here. All right, where is it? Okay. This right here is that short little hose that goes to the degas bottle. It curves around and it comes in right there. This hose from Ford, we bought it, had to buy a new one because it was leaking a while back. And it was $70, and they did not send a little metal clip. So you got to make sure not to bend those metal clips or lose them. And we didn't make too much of a mess with the antifreeze spilling out of that tank. That's, again, that's why it's a stupid system. They've got this little, in the bottom of the tank, the very bottom of the degas tank sits below the drain hole that attaches into that hose. So there's always going to be coolant left in your degas bottle. So you're always going to make a mess when you pull it out. It's a stupid system. But now that that's out of there, we can see we have the fuel cooling system to take out. And all of this is supposed to come out as an assembly. There's a bracket that holds it on. There's bolts scattered around. And then you're supposed to take this whole thing out as an assembly. And then just make sure you disconnect that from the actuator and then just hook it up there. Well, this thing here that I got the shop towel in, and you take that short hose off of the actuator, just stick it on here. That way you don't slosh out all the coolant that's in the fuel cooler. Now, the fuel cooler is more important than it sounds. I mean, you might think a fuel cooler, that sounds pretty dumb, but it's actually pretty important, because what happens is if your fuel gets hot and it's not able to cool the injectors off, you're going to damage your injectors. And so fuel cooler is very important. You can cool off the fuel before it goes to the injector, even if you could take 30-40 degrees away from it. Well, I mean, not even that. If you could take 10 or 15 degrees away, it makes a world of difference, I don't know if it actually does that much good, but the idea is sound. Okay, so I got the fuel cooler out. It's pretty easy to get out. There's a nut back here. It holds the back pressure sensor tube on. There's a nut up here, and it takes this real special doodad. It goes on there. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put some of this stuff back so I know where it goes, because sometimes I forget. So those two are 10 millimeter or 7/16, I believe. Nah, they're just 10 mil. There are 3 studs down here. This stud here has 2 nuts on it. One nut is to hold the fuel cooler onto there, and the second nut is to hold the oil dipstick tube. And the mount for the oil dipstick tube is right there. And I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and just put that back on. And all these nuts are 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter. 1/2 inch was a little tight, but they are all the same size, so it doesn't matter what order you put them back on. I always like to put my nuts and bolts back in the places where they go whenever I can. That way I don't lose them and I know where they go, and it's just a lot easier that way. So the second nut's right here, and it goes right in there. Okay, so those aren't going to go anywhere. You will have to disconnect right there. There's a heater hose. Just prop it up back here behind the brake fluid reservoir and you should be good. Disconnect your 2 fuel lines on top. There are 2 banjo bolts. They're a little stiff. That's good. You want them to be stiff. If they're loose, you should be concerned. And you want to take them banjo bolts out. You're going to want to cover those holes because fuel goes through them. And then you're also going to want to cover these up real well because fuel also, these are fuel lines. Just cover them up real well. I used to use a shop towel and electrical tape. That's good enough. If anything gets past that, we have more problems than dirt getting past it. So we come over here to the turbo, and I'm going to see if I can show you guys. Get in there a little bit better. See how much that's moving back and forth? That turbo's definitely shot. I can't believe we were driving that thing. Yeah, I'm glad we caught it before it completely quit. That is definitely a bad turbo, but it is Borg Warner, so we're replacing it with the proper thing. So another issue we need to address back in here is that right there, fuel leak. We're gonna see if we can fix that because it's been leaking and it gets the whole side of the engine dirty, as you can see. Now these right in here are rusty and they're not in very good shape. This is to the actuator. Good grief. So I can't do anything with them. They're just gonna have to stay like that. If they've run this long, they will run a little longer. None of that's getting into the turbos. So if you guys are thinking, oh, all that rust got into the turbos. No, that's not why. That's not why they quit. So once you got your fuel lines taken care of and you got everything else out of here, you're pretty much done on this side. The only other thing you got to do is disconnect that steering shaft, which I will do later. All this is done. Of course, you want to take that out. Oh, before I forget, when you do pull your fuel lines off and stuff, there's a little service port on this line right here. It's a little Schrader valve. Relieve the fuel pressure on the fuel system just to be safe. It's very, very important that you relieve the fuel pressure on the system before you do that, just to be safe. There shouldn't be any on there, but just make sure. Okay. And this is some high pressure stuff, especially when you get down into the fuel rail. Now up here, the transfer pump from the fuel tank only pushes it at like 6 pounds per square inch, 6 psi. So you don't have to worry about it being under high pressure, but it's just a good habit to get into to check all that stuff. So yeah, everything is out of here that needs to be out of here. I'll show you the fuel cooler assembly. This is the back side of it, okay, because here's the cap. So on the engine, it'll actually be oriented, hang on here, actually be oriented about like that. And you got those 3 there, that's slotted. These are just kind of press fits. And then yeah, I taped off this stuff up here too, just to make sure no contaminants got in it. So these right here have these little rubber rings in them. Okay, so these little rubber rings came in the valve cover gasket kit because it was for both sides of the valve cover. So I actually have replacements of these. I'm almost certain that's what those darn things are. So I'm going to replace those most likely. And then yeah, everything else is, oh man, everything else is off. It is oppressive out here. There ain't a drop of freaking wind. Well, that's not true. There's a little bit. Look at that tree there. There's a little bit of wind, but you guys can hear the cicadas. The cicadas are out. You know it's summertime. It may not be the 21st of June yet, but it's freaking summertime. It just freaking kill you out here. Oh man, I'd much rather be sitting at home in the air conditioning, but it is not to be. So this tube here into this turbo, how are we doing on cleanliness? Freaking spotless. Now, these turbos aren't very dirty or anything, but I know for a fact, I am no turbo expert, but I'm telling you right now, I can easily move that probably a 1/4 inch back and forth. Yeah, if I check for up and down, there's not a lot of up and down, maybe a 1/16 of an inch up and down movement. You shouldn't have really any up and down movement, but in and out, holy crap. That's at least a 1/4 inch, if not more. That is way excessive. And if we stick our finger right here, that's motor oil. You can see it on the turbines in there, or the vanes, or whatever you call them. I'm really tired. Being out here in the heat, it takes it out of you. I tell you what, it does not take long. So the next thing we're going to do is crawl underneath the vehicle, and we're going to get the shift cable and stuff disconnected. You got to disconnect the parking brake cable. There's a couple of, I think they're like right down there, those lines. There's some clips that hold them on. You got to take that off. That way when you raise the body, you're not catching or stretching anything excessive. And then over on the other side, we got to disconnect a few more things. But I'm waiting until the sun gets a little more on this side and a little less on that side before I go over to that side and do anything. And it's getting there. That's why I wanted to do this side first, because the sun will get to the driver's side first, and then it'll hit this elm tree, and it'll be shady here for the rest of the afternoon. About 3:30, 4 o'clock, I reckon. So yeah, we got to disconnect. So the powertrain control module, we got to take that off. We got to take this off, and because it connects into that part of the turbo, we got some more stuff to do. But right now, I think we're going to go underneath the vehicle. I'm going to take a break first, and then I'm going to go underneath the vehicle and get some of that stuff disconnected, and I'll get back to you as I do that or when it's done.
Hey everyone, it is the next day, and I came underneath the vehicle to get the transmission shift cable and the parking brake cable disconnected. So let's go over the transmission cable disconnect. I'm going to do my best to keep the camera level here. Alright, so that gives you guys a pretty good view. Alright, so right there, where that ball stud is, that's the lever that activates all your transmission gears. That's what the end of your cable attaches to. Above that, right there, is a little holder, and there's a plastic piece that's attached onto your cable. It snaps into there and holds your transmission cable in place. Very important. So to get all that off, we'll come down here to the cable itself. This is the end of it that goes on that ball stud. It just pops on. It is on there fairly stiff, so when you go to pry it off, just use a fair amount of force, but don't force it. It's, you know, because it is plastic. You don't want to break it. To get everything loose, you got to push this white tab up, and then I assume it just snaps back down when you get that, when you get all this put back in. I'm not going to force it right now, but to get it off at the end here, there's like a little spring loaded. It's like a little tab, and I pushed in on that with my screwdriver, and I managed to slide this up and then pull that off. So the second piece right there, you just got to pull it out or pry it out or whatever. They're supposed to be, if I get you closer here. All right, so like on those ears on either side of that, I guess they're supposed to be like little studs, because they're supposed to go in, bring you back up here. They're supposed to go in those little holes on that upper piece. Basically just break those off and pull it out, because they're not going to come without being broke off. I mean, if you can get it off without breaking them, power to you, but it's in there firm enough that if you don't have those little locating dowels or studs or whatever the hell they're called, you'll be fine. So that's how you get your transmission cable disconnected. You just need to disconnect it from the transmission itself and that little holder up there. That's all you need to do if you're just lifting the cab up a little bit. So I'll crawl out of here and I'll show you. Okay, so parking brake cable. Ow, hit the mirror. All right, so your parking brake cable looks like that, okay? And it looks like that. You see that wide part, and then it narrows down. So basically, the way it works, it's got these little pucks on the end, right? And it goes in that wide part, and then you pull it back, and it secures itself. And it is a little bit of a taper on there. And if you use your pickup for any kind of actual work where you have to drive in the mud, excuse me, chances are that's going to be rusty and it's going to be seized on there. So it's going to be a pain in the ass to get it off. There's no easy way to do it. The way I did it, I'm going to try and do this. I'll try and show you one-handed here because I don't have a tripod out yet. But basically, when it's in that little holder there, you just want to spray the crap out of it with WD-40 or whatever other special sauce you prefer. And get back behind it with a small screwdriver, like that, small screwdriver, because it's going to be in that way. So you want to come on the back side of that puck with a screwdriver, and you essentially want to hammer that thing towards the wide open part in the holder, and then you can get it off. Now, you're going to want slack in the cable. So to get slack in the cable, I'm going to take you back under here so I can show you. To get slack in the cable, because it comes through right there, pull it tight, or pull some slack in it, and then just take a pair of vice grips and slap them on right there. That'll stop that cable from wanting to retract back that way. Now, get you a little closer here where this body mounting bolt is at. That hole there and that hole there, that is where this cable comes through. To get it out of here, there's a couple of little tabs right there. If you compress them and just start the cable through, then you could pull it the rest of the way through. And best part, you can pull the holder through as well. So you really only need to take one side off. Ideally, you'd take this side off, but the back side that goes to the rear wheels where the parking brake is at, that's a lot easier to get off if you got to get in here and it's rusted and stuff. But it's just going to take time, and you're just going to have to work it back and forth, and it takes a month of Sundays, and it is a pain in the ass, so keep that in mind. Once you got that stuff disconnected, then you can start doing cab mounting bolts. Okay, so there's an example of one. There's 6. This is the middle one. It's right behind the front tire on the driver's side, and it's the same on the passenger side. There's a couple in front where your bumper are, and then there's one there, and same thing on the other side. So to break these loose, you could use an impact gun, yeah, but there are essentially castle nuts that those bolts screw into,
And so if you start using an impact gun with all that vibration, especially if the pickup is old and it's been, you know, driven through a lot of water and stuff and it's seen a lot of rust, then what you'll end up with if you use an impact gun is a spun nut, and that is no fun. I don't know how you get to them, so hopefully I'm going to get them all off with a ratchet. I already got that middle one broke loose there with just a 1/2-inch drive ratchet and the long extension. It's a 15mm socket. That's a nice tight fit, and I'm using a 6-point socket because that stuff that's this tight, I prefer to use 6-point sockets. That just ensures there's no chance of slippage on my end. So I got to get all these broke loose, and then we'll get our blocks under here and jack the cab up, and I'll show you how we've got everything jacked up and blocked up when we get it done. And well, then I'll move on to the turbo itself. That'll just be real fun. So yeah. Oh my, there's a little more wind today, thankfully, but it still sucks out here, and I don't feel the best. If you can't tell by my voice, just allergies, man. They just kill you. You see that back there? That's what we call lots of room. That ought to be more than enough for me to get back there and get all this stuff apart. So after getting the park and brake cable and transmission cable, all that undone, I worked on the mounting bolts. I did the middle ones first, and then I started working on the front. Now the front one on the driver's side spun, okay? And if it spins, don't panic. The front ones always take more abuse just because, you know, all the dirt and the water you collect, it's going to hit the front end first. You know, that's the way it is. So it's no surprise that they were a little more crusty than normal. But if it does spin, I'm going to try and show this on camera. It's a pain to get to down there. I'm going to try and show it on camera here, okay? If I can get my arms positioned. All right, so down in there, if I can get a light. Where's my flashlight when I need it? Well, down in there, okay, is where that nut sits. All right, now I really wish I could get you guys in there so you could see it. It's a pain in the ass to get to, because basically what it is I'm going to try and manipulate. I'm going to try and show you by hand manipulation. So it's basically like a couple pieces of flat iron that have half circles cut in them, so they kind of look like this, and they fold over the castle nut and stop it from spinning just by, I guess, faith. But it doesn't really work all that well. Once you start prying those essentially bent over sheet metal tabs, once you start prying them out, that nut's just going to sit there and spin. So the way you get in there and hold that so you get that bolt off, you got to take the headlight out. Okay, so there are bolts. There's like a bolt up here, and then there's two there, and then there's one down below. Now, we have the cow catcher on. It's a little bit different bumper than you may have on yours, but yeah, that final bolt's right down in there. Well, it's right there. So you get all that out, you take your headlight out. You shouldn't have to disconnect too many wires, just disconnect the stuff that's keeping the light in there. You get it out of the way, you can just fold it over like that, and then boom, it's out of your way, okay? So once you do that, you're able to get down in there in that slot. If you can get in there and pry those tabs out enough that you get them out of the way, then you can get in there with a wrench and you can hold that nut. Now there's one other thing in there that you have to remove, and it is, all right, so it sits right here. It's a little plastic tab. It's like a retaining tab, okay? You have to get that out of the way so you can maneuver your wrench in just like that. Well, or just like that. I know this is a little awkward for you guys to see, but I want to explain this because it's important. Don't panic if you spin the nut. It's not the end of the world. If you can get a wrench in there like that, you can hold it, okay? But you got to break that plastic tab off. You got to get the headlight out of the way. And when you look in there, you'll see it. It's hard to see. But if you get them two tabs pried out, you'll be able to get a wrench in there, and you can hold that nut, and you can get the bolt off, okay? Now, the nice thing is the nut is a 7/8 nut. The 7/8 wrench open end will go in there and it will fit it. But you have to get those damn metal tabs out of the way.
you might be able to get on it if you just get that plastic tab out of the way that sticks down at an angle. It's, you know, it sticks down like that. If you knock that out of the way, you might be able to get in there without trying to pry them tabs out. If you need to pry those tabs out, essentially what you need to do, I'll get back up here in the shade so you can see my hand better. The nut sits in there like this, okay? So when you're going to loosen it, it turns, right? So what you want to do is start sticking bolts, punches, key stock, whatever you got. You want to stick it in there between the flange on the castle nut and the metal piece, that metal tab, okay? So that at the end of the day, what you accomplish is when you turn that one way, it kind of sucks that piece in, and it forces it between that metal piece and the flange of the castle nut, and it pries that metal piece out. Okay, that's what you want to accomplish, and then because that's to loosen it, and then go the other way to tighten it, and bust that side out too. And then they'll be pried out of the way enough you got a little more room in there to work. It is very hard to see, and there's no way for me to get in there and show it to you with this camera. But if you can look in there, you'll see what I'm talking about if you're doing it. But that's if you spin the nut. If you don't, then you got nothing to worry about. So what the castle nut looks like, okay, so these right here are the bolts. There's my flashlight. Okay, but these right here are the bolts. This is one that came out of the middle. It's in real good shape, right? This is one that came out of the front. It's a little rough. It's hard to get WD-40 on these, and they just smear them in Loctite, so you're just going to have to fight it that way. But the castle nut looks like this, all right? So when it's in there, those two metal tabs hold it on either side, stop it from spinning. Well, as those things get pried out, like so, it just allows your nut to spin and make them worse. So what I was talking about a second ago was, I'm going to use this wrench as a pretend item, okay, so just bear with me here. What you basically want to do is stick a material in against this flat side of the nut and imagine the metal tab is over here. That way when you turn that nut, it kind of sucks that piece in and forces that metal part out. That's what I'm talking about. But this is a pretty simple piece right here. You can get, you know, this is a 7/8 end. It fits on there just perfectly. So it's, you know, you can get in there, you can get to it, it's just a pain in the ass. Now, if you spin the middle ones or the rear ones, I don't know what to tell you. I imagine you could probably dig under the carpet in the cab and probably get to everything that way. But to get this cab jacked up, and you don't have to jack it up much. I mean, we've only got it up, well, where the front mounts are, we've probably only got about 2 inches there. Not even 2 inches really, and because this is all angled, it makes an enormous difference back here on what you can get to. And I'm looking right now that, see those two, see that right there, see that nut right there, that bolt, excuse me, notice how there's not one next to it? That ain't normal. That's have, excuse me, good grief, that's gonna have to be fixed. But anyway, back to the cab lifting. To lift the cab, all we did was take the front ones out and the middle ones out, the mounting bolts, we took them all the way out, okay? The rear ones we took out to where you had about, I don't know, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch between the underside of the washer and the underside of the cab. And I'll crawl under there and show you what I mean. But once you do that, because you're not wanting to lift the cab as much as you're wanting to hinge it, because you only need this front part up just a few inches to be able to get back in there and actually be able to get some tools in and get to stuff. Once you get the backside bolts loose on the turbo and the up pipes and all that, you don't got to worry about much else. You know, the rest of it's actually pretty easy to get to. So you're just wanting to hinge it. So you don't need to take the back ones out. Now, all that being said, all you have to do is get a jack on the front end and lift the front end up, and just be careful, make sure stuff's not binding, and you can lift it up and just put some blocks under. I'll show you where to put them so that you can let off your jack, because you never want your load to rest on your jack while you're working on the equipment. You just use the jack to get it up, and then you put blocks or jack stands under there to hold it. That's for safety, just in case that jack decides to quit. And I've actually had a couple of jacks, they blow that oil plug out and the jack loses all its pressure and it drops whatever it's holding up. I've had that happen to me a couple times, which is why you always put blocks under there, and you don't want to screw around with doing that either, just in case. Safety
safety is, I'm not going to say first around here, but it is important. There's no need in getting hurt doing this. It's already is a big pain to do it anyway. You don't need to get hurt more. So all that's done. I'll crawl under and show you, because there's one thing I forgot to mention earlier that you do need to disconnect here. Okay, so as you can see, that's the middle mount right there. We don't have much of a gap there. Okay, if we go to the back, you can see we don't have a heck of a lot of room there. We don't need a heck of a lot. We just need that loose so it doesn't bend the frame. Now, to get under here, there is, and I forgot to say this earlier, and I'm sorry, right in here on these lines. Let me see if I can get the camera up here like that. Okay, so right there, you see that little plastic connector where all those lines are held together? Pop that out of the frame rail there so that it'll move a little bit. You're just supposed to do that, and then that way it can flex. So the only other thing you'll need to do is you'll need to get right up there. You'll need to loosen that pipe. I think it's that one. No, that's for the exhaust manifold. I don't believe you need to loosen it. You might. It's hard for me to get up in there and show you. So I'll show you later when I actually get it out. But there is an up pipe that you have to loosen on the bottom so you can take it out up top. Just give you extra room, and you don't run the risk of bending that damn pipe because they're not supposed to be bent at all. So yeah, once you get all that done, then you can see we just have the center blocks is where the lifting jack was at, and then those are just, they got jack stands and blocks on them just to hold everything. So I'll go out and I'll show you that. Ouch. So this is a setup we have for holding it. This is, well, okay, here's the bumper, here's the frame. This is where we have this jack stand resting. Okay, this is a pretty solid spot. Just make sure you get a good base for your jack stand. And then to lift everything, we've got this set up here, and we just lift it on that cross member that goes there, and then, you know, secure it on the other side. So it's really not hard to lift this. Just takes a lot of prep work. It's not heavy. The jack lifted it up just fine. Just make sure that nothing's binding. I have not taken the oil fill and stuff off yet, as you see, but right there I disconnected that PCM plug-in, and I do need to mention something about that real quick. So I'll tell you about that, and then I got to get started on this. I noticed the wind didn't come up until I started filming again. It wasn't blowing all morning. I'm just worn out from all the heat. So anyway, all right, so right here, this is supposed to pry out, and it's supposed to shove these, I guess, locking tabs out, and then you're supposed to be able to pull that off. Well, here's the deal. That's a stupid system, and it almost always breaks. I broke this side, okay? So if you just come in here, and if you still got the handle on, just work it a little bit, and then once them tabs start to stick out, just grab them and kind of pull them out and help pull them out that way while you're pushing on this. That way you don't break it. And then to put it back in, if you did break it, because there are the tabs right there, so you know they move back and forth. So when you get everything back in, just shove them in. Don't shove them in all the way. You got to be able to get to them again if you got to take it off. But yeah, just do that, and that's how you get that off. It does need to be out of the way just a little bit. So the only other thing is take this stupid oil fill off, and then I'll get in here with some air, kind of blast everything out a little bit, I think, and then we'll just start taking stuff off, and we'll go from there.